Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I got this question. I think it's a great question. I'm going to do an absolute crap job of answering it. But basically, the question is: Are there comics? Are there certain comics that just everyone should read? That like important to the comics reading experience? You need to read certain comics. What are those comics? What are the ones that kind of really define the entire space and everything that goes along with it? Well, it's a good question, and I think there are those comics. I think there are kind of, for lack of a better word, tentpole comics or comics that, if you read them, they do help give you an overall kind of image of what comics and graphic novels are or could be. And it's similar to how with books, people recommend Shakespeare as an understanding of literature, and if you want to truly understand kind of how a master can work, then Shakespeare is a good person to write, or Chaucer, or any number of texts. Now, what's interesting about kind of our current society, and this is really something that has always existed, but we're seeing a lot of it in like the last 5 to years or so, and it's this wanting to really re-examine the past. It's like, hey, did you realize that Shakespeare was a racist? For example, you shouldn't read his stuff, or we should get rid of idolizing him. And what's curious about that whole trend, by the way, I don't want to do. I'm not doing a video about that. I'm doing a video. What I have to say about that is maybe it's a good idea not to idolize anyone beyond just what their works are. Like Shakespeare produced a lot of very classic literature. I don't know what the guy was like. I have no idea. There's lots of historical accounts. Some saying he was brilliant. Some saying he was a terrible person. I don't know. All I know is the text itself that he wrote. There's a lot we can learn from it. And so this kind of desire to want to look into who the person was, I have to believe this is a bit of a fad. And at some point, people are going to be like, you know what, we can separate the art from the artist, and we can kind of move forward with that. And especially for some of this stuff that's like centuries old, like what is the point at this? What is the what are we doing anymore? But with comics, I do think there are some things that you can read that really impact, that can impact your kind of understanding what comics are and can be. Now, for me, and this may just be me, and I think this entire thing is a personal judgment call. I'm sure some group of people can get together and kind of decide what the perfect set for everyone is, but I always kind of look a little suspect because those groups tend to go for more kind of they tend to eschew mainstream work. Like it's like, well, we can't recommend, Fantastic Four #1. We can't recommend it because it's by a mainstream comic company. It's by Marvel. Like I saw one of these lists of like the 10 comics will tell you, that are important to understand kind of your understanding of the entire industry. And it had Saga on there. And I think Saga is a great comic. Don't get me wrong. I think it's wonderful. But it's also still going, and it's relatively new. And I don't know that I could put it on a list of something like this is one of the 10 comics of all the comics to really understand what the industry is. I'm a big fan. I like that book. I think it's great, well written, all the rest. I just, when I see stuff and they like, this list had like Saga and Matt Fraction's Hawkeye, and I think it had Superman Smashes the Klan on there, and it's like, these are not. I mean, in the context of all of comics, I mean, again, all fine books. I like all those books. I'm probably the least favorite of all those for me is Hawkeye. But would I say if I only could pick 10 comics in all of comics, Hawkeye would be, one of the ones on the list? No, not for me anyway. But so this is from my opinion, and you will have yours, and that's fine. By the way, as an aside, I want to throw out there an irritation. I will reveal a weakness of myself here right now. People say lots of things about me. On any given week, I am a comic skate or I am SJW person. I don't know what that SJW town. I don't. One of those. Anyway, at any given minute, people are labeling me all the time, and as you all know, I don't like to be labeled, and I tend to just roll my eyes and let it go. But I had the this one does get under my skin. I had an accusation of gatekeeping. Like Perch is gatekeeping. Now, why did they say that? Well, because when I tweeted out the link to the interview and retrospective of Grant Morrison and Richard Case's Doom Patrol, in which Joe Corallo and I interview Richard Case, which was absolutely amazing. I thought it was awesome just listening to him talk, incredible, loved it. In doing that, I said, here's something you really need to listen to, or I don't remember exactly what I said. It's like, hey, this is a great, look at one of the, great comic runs of all time. And I got a Perch is gatekeeping, because he's saying if you don't know who Richard Case is, then you're not a true comic fan. So first of all, I never said that. And two, I mean, how absurd can you get? I just that it got under my skin. I admit, it's just stupid people saying stupid stuff. Most of the time, you can ignore it. This one, no, it's dumb. I also, I mean, the various times, like somebody, there's a different groups, like it's that Perch with his Comicsgate channel. It's a Comicsgate channel. It's like it comes out, at the same time I that interview with Richard Case did drop, where I'm talking about how cool it was that Morrison and Case were introducing some of these progressive concepts back in the early 90s, long before it was trendy to do so. So I guess, I don't know. Maybe I don't understand what these different terms mean. It's possible that I'm confused. But anyway, gatekeeping for saying Richard Case is interesting to listen to. Jesus. Anyway, what are we going to do? But back to the topic at hand. Look, I think that for me, when I think about comics you need to read, I always think about it in terms of these, whether I like the comic or didn't like the comic, I look at it as this is a comic that meant something to the industry. This is one that by being produced, by being published, by coming out, it had an impact. So, like, for example, I would recommend, if you're talking about the last 40 years or so, that you read Civil War. I think it's a good read for a couple of fronts. It really defines what an event comic is for Marvel in particular. It is a turning point for that publishing house and what they were doing. It has the beats and the story structure that were such that Marvel would go on to try and clone that success pretty continuously for the next 15 years. I think that's a comic that you should read. By the way, I would also put up Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol on that list. I do think that as well is an example of. I think that you could. I think you could make a very strong argument that Grant Morrison, Richard Case's Doom Patrol was the birth of Vertigo. That was the genesis behind a lot of what quote unquote mainstream indie comics are. I think Watchmen is on that list for me. I think, again, and that's not my favorite comic, but I do think it's one of those that it's been referenced so often. It has a style of storytelling that people would go back to. To me, these are comics that I think help sum up what comics are. And I often, by the way, point to things like this and say, hey, you should read these different events. Secret Wars, the original, back from the 80s, is one on that list. And oftentimes, when somebody is trying to get into comics, I will suggest some very different books. Like, hey, you should read this Doom Patrol book. You should read Secret Wars. And those two could be, nothing could be further apart from those two books. But it helps the reader kind of understand what they like and what they want to gravitate to and what resonates for them. And I think the most important part of these lists of like the 10 most important comics you're going to read and all the rest, to me, the important part of that exercise is to figure out what you love, what you like, what kind of story, what style is something that is going to entertain and excite you, and and help you determine what comics you want to read in the future. I think that if you love Secret Wars and you hate Doom Patrol, then there's a definite style and tone. I mean, from there I can say, hey, you're going to like this run of X-Men, you're not going to like this other run of X-Men. Hey, you're going to be happy with this stuff, you're not going to be happy with this stuff. You can start to make some judgment calls on what people will like. Maybe that's the retailer perspective in me. It's also why I always think that I always hate the stance of people saying, like, I'm not going to review this comic because I don't care for this writer or this artist or this whoever it happens to be. I always think that's poor form, because it is intentionally shutting yourself out does no good for anyone. Doesn't do good for you, doesn't do good for your audience who's trying to determine what it is that they like and what they don't. It is. It's curious to me. I always, willingness to put yourself in a bubble should be your last resort. Your goal should be to get that bubble as big as humanly possible, so you learn about yourself and you learn what you like. But back to the question at hand. I think you can make a big good argument that Frank Miller's Dark Knight and Dark Knight Returns, for two very very different reasons, are ones that deserve to be on that list. I think you could go into the Claremont and Cockrum and Claremont and Byrne run of X-Men. I think that's another one. I definitely think you have to put in Stan Lee's Fantastic Four and kind of what he did. I think you need to go into Jim Shooter's Legion and that run of comics. Um, I mean, the crazy part is I think there's enough kind of tentpole series and comics that you can see a little bit of everything and pretty quickly hone in on the type of story you like, the genre and everything else that really works for you. I also think you could do the same exercise with writers. Like, for example, if you say, okay, what's a quintessential Jonathan Hickman? Like, if you're curious about Hickman, what should you read in 6 issues or so that are going to kind of give you enough of a flavor of that artist, that creator, that will, cause you to realize if you want to read more or not. For Jonathan Hickman, I would say East of West is, for me, the one where you will learn a lot about what Hickman does and kind of his storytelling and the beats he uses and his style through that series. You'll learn a lot. You'll learn a lot through that. So I think there's a lot of things like that. It's to me, and again, I told you my bias at the beginning. I don't think that having comics that are still going, that are ongoing. And when I say still going, I mean, you could argue. I can point to the Claremont Byrne Cockrum run of X-Men and say, that's something that you can do. Now, obviously, the X-Men is still going as a title, but that particular run, that arc, is finished. I've seen some people, like I saw somebody the other day say that Vita Ayala's New Mutants is one of those comics you have to read before you die. And it's like, but she's written one issue. Like, it seems a little premature, and by the way, like a lot of people I know on this channel and other places, I have nothing against Vita. I've read good Vita stories. I've read Vita stories I didn't care for. I didn't mind New Mutants. I thought it was okay, but it's one issue. Like I can, especially with today's storytelling where the stuff's decompressed and spaced out. I don't know how you can tell anything from one issue. Like I can't. Like you can go back to like the 70s and 80s, and it's frankly why I like that era better. And you can pick up a 22-page comic, and you can get a pretty good journey within that comic. Today, the storytelling is a lot more. It's just there. It's a lot. You get a lot less out of 22 pages. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that today's comics are bad and yesterday's comics are good. Yes, I do prefer the 70s and the 80s as an era, but it's a different style, and it's harder to determine kind of what you're in for with one issue. And again, this is your mileage may vary. It's why I've had some people who have said, because I didn't like the Marauder Storm story in Ten of Swords, and I don't think it's indicative as one of the most powerful Storm stories of the last 20 years. Now, some people do, and I've got a guy who, very politely, nicely, said, I disagree. This is why I think it's great, and no problems there. But for me, number one, it's got two strikes against it. It's in the middle of an event, so it seems sandwiched in between other things. It's hard to get kind of a powerful standalone character moment within an event. And by the way, if you go back to Fall of the Mutants or Mutant Massacre or the Korvac Saga or any of the rest, I think events change character beats in stories. That's just me. That's my personal view. So it doesn't matter whether it's today or yesterday. I think it's tough to get, a quintessential character moment while it's, part 4 of a 20-part crossover. It's like Avengers Galactic Storm did not have the quintessential Quasar moment. I just didn't. For me, maybe for you. The other piece is, again, it was one issue. And when I think about kind of the buildup of Storm, for example, with Life, Death, and kind of some of the stuff that went on with Barry Windsor Smith, Chris Claremont, how it played out over several issues, how the journey of Storm as a character, an incredible journey, happened from kind of the X-Men, in the 180s all the way through to fighting Cyclops for leading the X-Men, through the massacre, through getting her powers back. I mean, that entire kind of arc of the character is a super powerful one. And I think to compare that with the 20-page story, it's not fair to the 20-page story. So that's why I just won't. But anyway, what about you? What are your comics that you would say are quintessential? Like, you should read this comic if you want to understand everything comics has to offer. What would be that? What are those comics? What are the stories that help you kind of determine what comics can be? Let me know in the comments below. It's a big question. And also, do you think it is truly personal, like I'm saying, or do you think that you can kind of speak for everyone? Is there a list on top of a list that just works for everyone? Like, should everyone be forced to read Watchmen, period, no matter what you think? That's just a comic that everybody has to read. Let me know in the comments below. Hey, like and subscribe. Uh, Follow me on social media. You can find all the information in the description to this video of where to get in touch with me. Hey, if you think I'm a jerk, rather than saying so behind a block wall or being a passive-aggressive little jerk about it, why not drop me a mail? It's right there. You could say, "Hey, you hurt my feels, and I want vengeance." Man, I would love for one. I've been waiting for one of those mails, just like that. You hurt my feels. I want vengeance. Anyway, thanks for listening.